Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Friends of the Dar, ladies and gentlemen, good evening. Tonight is the final Monday lecture of the 28th cultural season of al-Athar al-Islamiyyah. Throughout the season, we have enjoyed a number of presentations by a number of eminent scholars and experts in a variety of studies and areas of expertise. Although the topics of this season have been far-ranging and individually separate, one theme has returned throughout the season. It centers around this year's exhibition at al-Athar al-Islamiyyah, namely Arabia, Felix, and Rome, a passage across 3 seas. Studies on prehistoric and ancient Arabia have been repeatedly featured in our lectures. Each one was unique, represented a separate culture or area or individual time period, but each one shed light on a previously ignored facets of Arabian history. Whether it was commercial activities, connecting little-known ancient towns and areas outside the peninsula, or the archaeological record restoring details of these cultures. It is appropriate tonight that al-Athar al-Islamiyyah is pleased to present, and forgive me if I don't pronounce it properly, Dr. Jerome Rohmer. He will be discussing an ancient area not far from modern Kuwait in a lecture entitled The Ancient Caravan City of Thaj and the Archaeology of Northeastern Arabia from the Iron Age to the Eve of Islam. Dr. Rohmer is a thoroughly well-qualified archaeologist who comes to us from the French Center for Scientific Research. The Dar is especially pleased to welcome a scholar from the prestigious institution, whose members have regularly participated in our lecture series over the past 40 years. Dr. Rohmer has been doing research on Northern Arabia for almost 20 years and has co-directed excavations. So we are dealing with quite an accomplished scholar. With the end of the season, there is one thing that I personally will miss: telling you to turn off your mobile phones. So please turn them off and let's welcome Jerome.
Thank you very much, Dr. Al-Bayjan, for this kind introduction. I would like to begin by extending my warmest thanks to Her Excellency Sheikha Hafsa Al-Sabah for inviting me to do this talk in this wonderful place. And I would also like to thank her amazing team, Salam Kaoukji, Dana Al-Mayal, and Mutlaq Al-Jureid, for welcoming me and for giving me a glimpse of the richness of the Al-Sabah collection yesterday and this morning. I was really, really amazed. So, as Dr. Al-Bayjan mentioned, I will talk today about the caravan city of Thaj in eastern Arabia, a site which indeed is very close from Kuwait, as it lies only 280 kilometers south of Kuwait City. I will focus more particularly on the results of the archaeological project I've been co-directing at this site between 2016 and 2022. This project is a collaboration between my institution, the French Scientific Center for Scientific Research, CNRS, and the Saudi Heritage Commission, which was represented in the project by my co-director, Ibrahim Al-Mushabbi. During these 7 years of work, we conducted 5 seasons of excavation and 4 seasons of study, and these works shed critical new light on the site. They revealed in particular a much longer history than was previously thought, an history extending from the end of the Iron Age to the eve of Islam over more than 1 millennium. And actually it even extends a bit beyond that, as we will see. So today, I'm not going to give you a detailed account of all our discoveries, because the time of this talk wouldn't be sufficient for that. Rather, what I'm going to do is try to put the main results of our project in chronological order to give you an overview of the site's history through time as we understand it today. So first, as most of you are not familiar with the site, I guess, I will begin with a presentation of Thaj and a brief presentation of the previous research that has been made there before the beginning of our works. And then I will embark on this long chronological journey, which will take us from the late Iron Age to the eve of Islam in several stages. So, first a few words about the location of the site, especially in the context of ancient Arabia. So as you can see on the map, Thaj is located in the eastern province of modern Saudi Arabia, 90 kilometers to the west of the modern harbor of Al-Jubail. Actually, it is by far the largest pre-Islamic site we know in the entire Eastern Arabia. As you can see on the map, which features the ancient trade route in a very broad way, Thaj enjoyed a very strategic location on these ancient trade routes. Yeah, so Thaj is here, and you can see that first Thaj is located on this major Trans-Arabian route, which connects South Arabia with Lower Mesopotamia here, a route which is well attested by accounts of the 19th and the 20th century, but which was already in use during antiquity, as its major stops are actually described by Pliny the Elder in the 1st century AD. Second, you can see that Thaj lies near the coast and that it's connected with the coast, with the area of Al-Jubail more precisely, through a track which is known today as Darb al-Konhori. So Thaj, in this way, was connected through the maritime networks of trade, which we know were active in antiquity, at least since the 3rd millennium BC. So now, if we zoom in a little, we can see that the site is located on the southern edge of a large sabkha, that is a salt flat, which is seasonally flooded in winter and in spring. You can see this sabkha, after it has dried up at the end of the spring, with this very white crust of salt that deposited at its bottom. The presence of this sabkha indicates, of course, the presence of abundant underground water in this area. And this is confirmed by the presence in and around the site of many wells, of which you can see an example here on this picture. Many of these wells are ancient because they were built in well-quarried blocks, characteristic of the ancient settlement, but they were put back into service at the beginning of the 20th century AD, when the area was resettled. So, as you see, it's no coincidence that the site developed here. There was an abundant water resource, and it's no coincidence, too, that the area of Thaj is known in the Arabic tradition as Wadi al-Miyah, the Valley of Waters. So the site consists of 3 parts. The most conspicuous and central one is a large walled city delimited by a massive city wall here on the southeastern shore of the Sabkha. As can be seen on the picture here, the outline of the city wall is very well visible on the surface. The city wall is massive, it's built of stone, and it's about 5 meters wide, judging by the surface remains. It is approximately 700 meters long east-west and 550 meters long north-south, and it encloses an area of 40 hectares. This walled area is not entirely accessible to archaeological works. In its central part here, you can see that there is a village. This village dates back to the early 20th century, when a part of the Azmi tribe, the Awazim, settled in the area. You can see a house of this old village of Thaj here on the screen. And this village is still partly inhabited today. So we cannot do excavations in this area. North of this village, there is a palm grove, which is currently in a state of relative decay, as you can see on the picture, but which was in use until the 70s. Actually, the only part of the site which is devoid of modern constructions and installations, and which is protected by a fence erected by the Saudi authorities at the beginning of the 80s, is the southern third of the walled city, here, which you can see on these large panorama pictures. So this area, well, you can't really see anything because the picture is too wide, but it is actually covered with wall lines, and it is literally strewn with pottery sherds, which indicate a very, very dense ancient occupation. This walled city is the first component of the site. The second component lies immediately to the southeast, and it's actually a suburb lying outside the city wall. A suburb where we can see wall lines too, and a lot of surface pottery as well, spreading over an area of about 10 to 12 hectares. I will come back to this suburb later, of course. Then the third area, well, the third component of the site is a huge necropolis. A necropolis which, I'm going to go back to the satellite image, which stretches all around the site here, looks like a crescent, to the west, to the south, and to the northeast, and of course not to the northwest because there is the Sabha, which was not favorable to the setting up of tombs. This necropolis, as you can see, is made of burial mounds. We counted more than 1,000 of them. These burial mounds are of two types. First, there are regular burial mounds, like this one. And second, there are what we call white circles. So ring tumuli, which are delimited by a circle of very white crushed limestone, which makes them very visible, especially from the air. So you can see that the site has impressive surface remains, and these surface remains didn't go unnoticed to the travelers and explorers who visited the region since the late 19th century. Actually, the archaeological importance of the site was reported by scholars as early as the early 20th century. And during that century, the site was visited several times by British soldiers, Aramco employees, and scholars, including the Dixons and the American botanist Charles Mandeville, who both provided detailed accounts of the site and excellent maps of it. Well, maps of the surface remains, of course, because they didn't excavate. During the 20th century, one thing that particularly drew the attention of scholars was a series of stone stelae with very well carved inscriptions, such as the one you can see on the screen. I put 3 of them. As you have probably noticed, these inscriptions are carved in a script which is very close to the South Arabian script. Actually, it differs only by a few details. However, their language is most probably local, and it's usually classified with the North Arabian languages of the Arabian Peninsula. Today, these inscriptions are known as Hassaitic, from a word which is derived from the oasis of Al-Hassa. But actually, most of them don't come from Al-Hassa. Most of them come from Thaj. I think that 26 out of 41 such inscriptions come from the site of Thaj. These inscriptions are very impressive, but the problem is that they are mostly funerary and that they feature nearly always the same repetitive funerary formulae. They begin with the same words, wagar wa qabr, so tombstone and grave of. Then there is the name of the deceased, then his genealogy, and sometimes his lineage, so his tribe, sub-tribe, etc. However, there are not many other types of information on these steles, which is a bit disappointing, although, as we will see a bit later, two of them mention kings, which, of course, is very interesting regarding the political situation of the site. So following the early explorations of Thaj by the Dixons, by Mendeville, the first in-depth archaeological investigation of the site was carried out by the Danish archaeologist Geoffrey Beebe, whom you probably know for his works in Bahrain. Beebe and his team not only surveyed and mapped the site, but they also opened three test trenches, a very narrow, deep trench along the southern city wall, and two trenches on burials. These trenches appear as blue dots on the screen. So here is the deep trench along the southern city wall. Here is one of the tombs, and the third tomb would lie over here. It's not included in the map. So based on these excavations and on the pottery he collected, Beebe dated the main period of occupation of the site to a very narrow period between 300 and 100 BC, a period which is usually known in literature as the Hellenistic period, but I have to put this between brackets, between inverted commas, because, well, the site is not Hellenistic. It's not part of the Hellenistic world, as we will see. So 15 years after Beebe, in 1983, larger-scale excavations were undertaken jointly by the Saudi Department of Antiquities and the Free University of Berlin under the direction of Mohamed Gazdar and Daniel Potts. 5 areas were excavated across the site. They appear as green dots on the screen. And these excavations led to a general reassessment of the chronology of the site, which Potts and his colleagues dated between the 3rd century BC and the 1st century AD, with possible limited reoccupations until the 4th century AD. Unfortunately, this project lasted only for 1 season, and even if small campaigns took place after that, they remained very limited in scale and didn't provide significant new information. Actually, the third and last major step in the exploration of the site before our works took place in 1999 when a Saudi team led by Abdelhamid al-Hashash undertook the excavation of several burial mounds, 3 tumuli, and 2 white circles. Their most conspicuous discovery was an aristocratic burial under a huge tumulus to the northeast of the ancient site. A tumulus which the excavators named Tel Zair. The tomb lay in the center of the tumulus, and it consisted of a cist, that is a stone coffer, made of limestone blocks, a cist which contained the remains of a child of about 10 years of age. The body was lying on a funerary bed with elaborate sculpted legs, which you can see here on the screen. And the body was accompanied by very rich grave goods in gold and jewelry. Here I made only a selection. There are many more grave goods in this tomb, which are on display at the National Museum in Riyadh. Based on that material, which is partly imported from the Roman world, the excavators dated this burial to the 1st century AD. But personally, I would tend to think that a later date in the 2nd century AD, or maybe even the 3rd century AD, cannot be completely excluded. So, as you can see, Thaj was far from being terra incognita when we started our project in 2016. These previous works had shown that the site was a very large and very wealthy city, which reached its peak between the 3rd century BC and the 1st century AD. Thaj appeared by far as the most important settlement of this period on the entire Arabian shore of the Gulf. For this reason, several scholars have identified Thaj to ancient Gera, Gera being this fabulously rich caravan city of northeastern Arabia, which is mentioned by Greek and Latin historians and geographers. Here you can see on the screen 3 excerpts of ancient literature dealing with Gera, 2 by the geographer Strabo and another by the historian Polybius. And these texts really highlight the wealth of this city of Gera. So Strabo tells us that Gera was as rich as Saba. It was one of the 2 richest cities in the whole Arabian Peninsula. And Polybius tells us that in 205 BC, when the Seleucid king Antiochus III besieged the city, the inhabitants of Gera bought their freedom from him at an incredibly high price. So Polybius talks about 500 talents of silver, that should be approximately 12.5 tons, 1,000 talents of frankincense, so 25 tons, and 5 tons of stacte, which is very refined myrrh, and that amounts to about 5 tons. So that gives you an idea, even if these figures are probably a bit exaggerated, of the wealth of this ancient Gera. So Thaj is one of the candidates for this ancient city, which fascinated the Greek and Latin authors. Unfortunately, the geographical indications which Strabo and Ptolemy give us are too vague to determine with certainty the location of Gera. They actually fit broadly with Thaj, but other possibilities can also be contemplated. So the identification of Thaj with Gera is far from being certain. For example, Christian Robin and Alessia Prioletta recently made a good case for identifying Gera with El Hofuf, which lies 200 kilometers south of Thaj. This identification is actually also very convincing, but it's not 100% sure either. And the main reason for this is that no significant archaeological remains are known from Al Hufuf. So the debate is open, it's far from over. And unfortunately, I have to say that our excavations have not provided any new solid piece of evidence regarding this issue, so we still don't know if Thaj is Gera. However, even if Thaj was not Gera, Thaj, given its importance, must have been the center, the capital of a local state or local kingdom, one of these local kingdoms which we know existed during the Hellenistic period in East Arabia through the coins that have been found in the region. Here I have put on the screen a selection of these silver coins, very well made, which are actually derived from the coins of Alexander and which are found all across Eastern Arabia. These coins were struck at several places, and it is very likely that some of them were struck at Thaj, which probably was the center of one of these kingdoms. So now after this long introduction, sorry for that, but I hope this gave you a sense of the importance of the site. Let's now turn to the results of the works we conducted at the site during this 7-year period between 2016 and 2022. So actually the first operation we made when we came at the site was a general mapping of it, combining 2 methods. The first one was drone mapping, so we made a general orthophoto of the site using a drone, and we combined this with geomagnetic mapping, a method which allows to detect underground remains through anomalies of the Earth's magnetic field. The geomagnetic mapping was actually very, very successful, and it made it possible to identify precisely the main streets of the ancient settlements. So when we combined the orthophoto made with the drone and the geomagnetic map, we were able to draw a very precise map of the southern third of the walled city and of its suburb. As you can see on this map, the layout of the city wall now appears very clearly with its diamond-shaped corner towers and its regularly spaced buttresses along the sides. Inside, we can see that there are streets, very long streets, parallel to each other. The organization is not completely regular. You see that there are different orientations, but there seem to be several patterns indicating probably several stages of urban development. I put here a schematic map of the different patterns of the streets showing you these different orientations. Interestingly, what we can see when we look at this map is that the southeastern suburb shows a very distinct layout, very distinct organization. There are no well-defined streets. There are larger buildings, more distant from each other. And you can see it on this picture. Many of these buildings have a very particular layout. They are very large, and they consist of rows of rooms around a central courtyard. And this type of plan is, of course, reminiscent of Caravanserai or Khans. So it is possible that we are dealing here with an area for caravans with Caravanserai. So at first, so since the very beginning, we sensed that this southeastern suburb had a very specific function, probably related to trade and perhaps to craftsmanship. So based on this initial mapping, we then opened several excavation areas, 15 excavation areas in total, until 2022. And we distributed these excavation areas equally between the necropolis here and the settlement, the walled city and the suburb, in order to get information not only on the city of the living, but also on the city of the dead. These excavations were accompanied by a lot of specialized studies: ceramology, geoarchaeology, paleobotany, archaeozoology, and all these studies now allow us to have a much better understanding of the history of the site from a very early period, the late Iron Age, until the eve of Islam, and that's what I'm going to present you now, going slowly phase by phase. So let's begin with the earliest occupations identified in the region. These occupations were actually identified through surveys we carried out around the site. So first, a prehistoric survey made by Rémi Crassard, whom some of you may know because he was a researcher with the CEFREPA here in Kuwait for some years. So the prehistoric survey allowed to identify occupations from the Middle Paleolithic and from the Neolithic, as is illustrated by this find of an arrowhead of the late 6th or 5th millennium BC found near the site of Thaj. For later periods, my colleague Olivia Munoz identified and studied in 2021 a huge necropolis located in the desert, some 40 kilometers to the south of Thaj. This necropolis features several types of mounds and shows a period of use between the second half of the 3rd millennium BC and the early 1st millennium AD, so nearly 3 millennia. Interestingly, several of these mounds have yielded radiocarbon dates of the late 2nd millennium BC and the early 1st millennium BC. And this is very significant because this period was never attested in the region so far. So this shows us one thing, that is that the area, the region, was not empty, was not devoid of human occupation when the site of Thaj appeared. So in addition to these surveys, we carried out core drillings near the Sabha. They were made by Cosmas Pavlopoulos and Eric Fouache, who are in charge of the geoarchaeological study. And these core rings showed very favorable humid conditions from the late 4th millennium to the late 1st millennium BC, although with some episodes of aridification. And these core rings provided actually the first evidence for construction activities at the site, sometime between 805 and 563 calibrated BC. This evidence consists of chips of limestones, which cannot but result from construction activity, from carving activities. So when these dates came up, we were very surprised because we thought that the sites only appeared in the 4th century BC. So at first, the whole team was a little skeptical about them. And we remained skeptical until 2021, actually, when new evidence came up. During this 2021 season, Guillaume Chungto carried out a very deep sounding inside the walled city, in our area 11 here, in the courtyard of a late building he had been excavating. Unfortunately, he couldn't reach the virgin soil due to safety reasons, but he recovered a stratigraphy of about 4.5 meters, at the very bottom of which there was a layer of ash with ceramics, which was radiocarbon dated between the 8th and the 6th centuries BC, the same horizon as that we found in the core. Interestingly, the ceramics from this layer belong to a production which was not known so far. A production characterized by an orange-colored fabric with organic and grit temper. This production was identified by our ceremologist, Seth Brisman, and it appears, well, it seems that it was produced locally, so there was already some kind of craftsmanship at the site during that period. In the necropolis, at least one burial of the same period was identified. It comes from a multi-burial tumulus excavated by Marie Laguardia in 2019. This tumulus, as you can see on the picture, was formed by the agglomeration of several burials through time, and actually the earliest of these burials was found at the very bottom under later stone cysts, which covered it and damaged it partly. This earliest burial was radiocarbon dated between the 8th and the 5th century BC, so roughly the same horizon. It consisted of an adult individual lying on the side and covered with a small mound of stone and soil. So, to sum up, we have evidence for the development of a settlement with craftsmanship activities and an associated cemetery sometime between the 8th and the 6th or 5th centuries BC, that is, the end of the Iron Age. The extent and the importance of these settlements are, of course, very uncertain, but it's nonetheless a very interesting discovery because that period is very elusive in Northeast Arabia. So far, there is only very limited evidence for this period, evidence coming from the eastern province of Saudi Arabia to some extent, from Bahrain, of course, and to a very limited extent from Failaka in Kuwait. Actually, it's perhaps no coincidence that Thaj started to develop precisely during that period. Indeed, in the current state of knowledge, it is probably during the 6th century BC that Trans-Arabian routes linking directly South Arabia with Mesopotamia were first opened. Of course, we have no evidence that this early settlement at Thaj was connected with long-distance trade at that time, but this is probably something to keep in mind. This synchronism is quite striking. Now, we have no idea whether the late Iron Age settlement progressively evolved into the city of Thaj, or whether there was a gap between the two. This is something we're still trying to figure out. However, what is now certain is that the first great phase of urban development at Thaj took place between the 4th and the 2nd centuries BC. As you can see here, this period corresponds to the latest humid phase identified in the core drillings of the Sabha. At a regional scale, this phase corresponds to a massive increase in the number of sites throughout Northeast Arabia, be it in Kuwait, Bahrain, and in the eastern province of Saudi Arabia. So Thaj is not alone. At Thaj, this chronological horizon was identified in virtually all the areas we excavated, as you can see on the maps, where fine spots of the 4th to 2nd centuries BC appear as red dots or red triangles. Within the walled city, it was identified in our two intramural excavation areas, Area 11, so over the late Iron Age phase, and Area 6, where it was lying directly over the virgin soil, which means that the Iron Age settlement didn't extend until here. It was really limited in that area. Most importantly, this face was also identified in our area 2 here, which actually corresponds to the southeastern monumental gate of the city wall. And in that area, we actually recovered a stratigraphic sequence spanning the 4th to 2nd century BC under the remains of the city wall, as you can see on this picture. There are several layers of occupation, several structures, and the sequence ends with a forge or a smithy dated to the 2nd century BC, and it is clearly located under the towers of the city wall, which destroyed it partly at least. So this shows us that the city wall didn't exist at that time. The city was not fortified, or at least it was not fortified in the way we know it today. And the city wall, which is visible on the surface, did not exist. And that is a major discovery, because previously the city wall used to be dated to the very beginning of the sites of the 3rd century BC. This horizon was also spotted in the south, outside the city wall, in Area 1, which is in the southeastern suburb, where Fabien Légué excavated a huge building, under which he discovered the remains of an early building dated between the 4th and 3rd century BC, made, as you can see, of very well-cut ashlars, but very partly exposed, so we don't know its function. But it was something really monumental, dating from precisely this period. So actually what we can deduce from these finds is that in this 4th to 2nd century BC horizon, there was already a very extensive settlement at the site, which was not fortified and which extended towards the south. It actually encompassed both the suburb and the southern part of the walled city. And perhaps more, we still don't know the exact extent of it. So along with this very extensive occupation, we also witness in that period the development of industrial activities and water management infrastructures. In the northeastern part of the site, here in Area 8, which actually corresponds to Tel el-Zayr, the aristocratic tumulus excavated by Abd al-Hashash, where the golden mask was found. Well, under this tumulus, Fabien Légué discovered in 2018 the remains of an ancient pottery kiln dated precisely to the 4th and 3rd centuries BC. And this discovery is very meaningful because it shows that there were important craftsmanship activities at the site, and that this area to the northeast of the site was not always a necropolis. It was first an area devoted to craft activities such as pottery production. So you can see that the areas changed their function over time. As for the northwestern part of the site, it appears to be devoid of ancient structures. That's what actually we deduced from the geomagnetic mapping, where nothing appears. Well, we can see the lines of the city wall here in the northwestern corner of the site. And then no structures except for this diagonal line oriented southeast-northwest, which was very enigmatic and which prompted us to open several trenches to check what it was. And these trenches actually revealed a massive channel, which you can see on the picture here, running towards the northwest, towards the Sabha, and dated precisely to our 4th, 2nd century BC horizon. This channel was probably not an irrigation channel because it leads to the Sabha, so there's no point in doing an irrigation channel with this orientation. It was probably a drainage channel, probably evacuating the water from the ancient city or from intramural gardens, or from gardens located in that area. The development of the settlement in this early period is also fully mirrored in the necropolis. The surface material from the necropolis, which was collected during an intensive survey by Marie Laguardia and which was studied by our ceremologist Seth Prisman, clearly shows an extensive use of the necropolis as early as the 4th and 3rd centuries BC. And there are very good markers of that period, namely Greek-style black gloss pottery, which I will show you a selection of a bit later. So this shows, these shards were probably used either as grave goods or as part of commemorative ceremonies, for instance, banqueting. And so the necropolis is literally strewn with shards, and this shards shows us that already in the 4th and 3rd century BC, the necropolis nearly reached its maximal extension. So we're dealing with a very, very quick development. By contrast, we excavated only 2 burials from this period. A single burial tumulus in the south of the necropolis, area 7, and the burial of a newborn in 2 bowls placed one on top of the other, within a multi-burial, multi-period tumulus, area 14. This low number is a bit surprising, but actually it's due to the fact that most burial mounds remained in use for a very long time period, and that earlier burials were covered or even damaged by later ones. So it's much more difficult to access the burials from the early period than the later ones, and that accounts for this underrepresentation of 4th, 3rd centuries burials in the record. As far as funerary practices are concerned, it should also be mentioned that the Hassaitic steles I mentioned at the beginning of this talk are usually thought to begin in the 4th or 3rd centuries BC, although this is a very tentative dating because actually these inscriptions never refer to a well-dated external event, so it's hard to anchor them into absolute chronology. Unsurprisingly, this period is also marked by the development of local production and of trade. Local production and trade which are particularly visible in the pottery record. First, this is the period in which the main local production of pottery, a red sandy fabric known as Thaj ware, appears. This ware was extensively used for all kinds of shapes, including bowls which are inspired from Achaemenid prototypes. You can see a selection of such bowls here. In addition to this local pottery, however, we find a growing amount of imports. Unsurprisingly, some of these imports come from nearby Mesopotamia, such as these alkaline glazed bowls and these jars in cream orange ware. More unexpected, however, is the presence of many Mediterranean imports, including various types of East Mediterranean amphorae, which were used to transport wine, and very expensive wine. And, on the other hand, black gloss ware in the Attic style, which were not all produced in the region of Athens, but more widely in the Greek Mediterranean. The presence of these Mediterranean imports is very interesting in terms of trade routes, because the black gloss shards probably didn't come to the site through Mesopotamia, because they are very uncommon in Mesopotamia. Actually, to account for the presence of these shards, which appear in very significant quantity, we have to postulate the existence of a direct trade route between Eastern Arabia and the Mediterranean in the 4th and 3rd centuries BC, probably continuing into the 2nd BC. So this is interesting because we also have literary evidence for such a direct route. Here I put a short sentence by Strabo in his geography, who says that the Minians, so the South Arabian merchants of that time, and the Geraeans brought their aromatics to Petra, the Nabatean capital in southern Jordan. So it means that the Geraeans, the East Arabians, were going not only towards Mesopotamia, but they were going west to the southern Levant and to the Mediterranean at that time, and there was probably an overland route going there. So, following this first phase of urban boom, a major reorganization of the settlement took place at the end of the 2nd or during the 1st century BC. The main aspect of this reorganization was the construction of the city wall, which you can see in blue on the screen. I hope it's clear enough. A city wall which can now be dated to this period and not to the 3rd century BC, as was previously thought. This construction can be clearly observed in our area 2, where my colleague Damien Gazagne excavated the remains of a monumental gate. This gate has a very interesting layout. It actually features 2 projecting towers, which project towards the outside and which form a kind of outer chamber. Then, as one passes through the gateway here, there seemed to have been another gateway here, and so a kind of chicane turned to the left, which made it difficult for the enemy to penetrate directly into the walled settlement. So we are dealing with massive and quite elaborate military architecture here. So perhaps something symbolic, but more probably something functional designed to resist armies. So just a few words more about the city wall, because some scholars have made the case that it actually represents a Greek influence on Thaj, because it is regular, it's quadrangular, it has regularly spaced towers, both on the sides and in the corners. However, after doing a few research, I realized that quadrangular city walls are very, very uncommon in the Greek world. They do exist, but they are very rare. On the contrary, quadrangular city walls are very, very common in nearby Mesopotamia, especially in the first millennium BC. Think of Borsippa, think of Khorsabad, and even of Babylon. So actually, the most likely explanation for the layout of the city wall of Thaj is probably Mesopotamian influence, not Greek influence. When we come to the city gate, the situation is a bit different. I haven't found any parallels for that layout in Greek or Mesopotamian architecture, but perhaps I didn't make enough research. If you have parallels, I'd be interested in knowing them. What I found is parallels with South Arabian architectures, where we find such gates with projecting outer chamber. We find such a gate in Ma'in, in Yemen. The walls are thinner, of course, but the concept is the same. And we find another such gate in Khorkhori in Oman. The layout is a bit more complicated, but we have also this outer chamber outside the city wall, which acts as a first defense before the gateway. We even have in Khorkhori this chicane after the gateway, which echoes with what we find at Thaj. So, logically enough, what we find here are influences from both ends of the trade route Thaj was lying on. Influences from South Arabia at the southern end of the trade route, and influences from Mesopotamia at the northern end of this trade route. So within the city wall now, what we see in the excavation is relatively extensive occupation. Our 2 intramural excavation areas, Area 6 here, Area 11, have yielded significant remains from this period. However, the situation is a bit different in the southeastern suburb, which was strongly impacted by the construction of the city wall. Actually, it was separated from the main settlement, and it became a suburb. In this suburb, we first see a phase of abandonment and a phase where the early buildings were dismantled and reclaimed, probably for the construction of the city wall. And then after some time, in the 1st century AD, there was a revival of this area with the development of artisanal or industrial activities. Indeed, Fabien Légué in Area 1, in the southeastern suburb, found a very well-preserved pottery workshop dated to the 1st centuries AD and 2nd centuries, 1st and 2nd centuries AD, sorry, which you can see a couple of images of here. In addition to this, we have these large buildings with central courtyards, which I told you about already, and which might be caravanserais. And it's very likely that these buildings date back to this period also. So we have a kind of functional specialization going on here with industrial and probably trade activities being set up outside the city wall in the southern suburb. So a very simple solution would be to consider that we have the residential area within the city wall and all the trade and industrial activities outside in the southeastern suburb. However, the situation is slightly more complex because we did geomagnetic mapping in the northern third of the walled city. And as I told you, this geomagnetic mapping didn't reveal any remains. So to check that, we did several trenches, and the trenches confirmed that there was virtually nothing built except for the channel I just told you about. So we are dealing with an empty area to the north of the, well, in the northern part of the walled city. And the only possible explanation, in my opinion, is that we're dealing with intramural gardens. And this is substantiated by the fact that many, many wells are located in this area, as you can see on the map. So intramural gardens during that period. Outside the built-up area, outside the settlement, we find an extensive use of the necropolis. So you can see that the surface finds show that most of the funerary area was in use at that time. And we notice through the excavations that the tombs from that period tend to agglomerate, tend to regroup into funerary complexes, either burial mounds or white circles. You have two examples here of these funerary complexes, which include several burials, which actually agglomerated over quite a long time period, just like what we see in Bahrain during the Tilus period. Actually, it's interesting because we noticed that there is no real typological difference between the white circles and the tumuli. What you see here is actually two tumuli after the excavation. And what do we find at the base of the tumuli? White circles. So it just appears that the white circles are unfinished tumuli, which were left open to accommodate more tombs and which were never covered with a mound. In the necropolis, there's one area that stands out to the northeast, the area with this aristocratic burial of Tel el-Zayr I told you about. You have here an aerial picture of it, which shows you the size of this huge tumuli, probably of aristocratic nature. And what is interesting is that actually our excavation reveals that these tumuli were built on former industrial installations, just like the pottery workshop I showed you for the previous phase. So quite ironically, these very rich aristocratic tumuli were built from the rubbish of the earlier periods. So in the pottery record, the production of local Thaj ware continues with a variety of shapes, and we find imports, several types of imports, but these imports reflect a redirection of trade. Indeed, we don't find Mediterranean imports anymore. We find mostly Mesopotamian or Iranian imports, showing that the trade network was redirected towards the northeast. And the same is true for coins. While we have local productions of coins, we also have imported coins from Persia and Mesopotamia. This is a coin from a small kingdom called Elimaïs in modern Iran, dated to the late 1st or 2nd century BC. We also have coins. Well, this wasn't found by us, but by Awad Zahrani in 1994. It's a coin from the Caracinian kingdom, the kingdom which had its capital at Spasinu Karax, near modern Basra. Yeah, I'm going to speed up. And a small kingdom which actually controlled the maritime trade in the Gulf between the late 2nd century BC and the 2nd century AD. Now, Christian Robin recently made the case that this kingdom of Karasin actually controlled Thaj. Why? Because two inscriptions in the Hassaitic script mention kings which are likely to be kings of Karasin. They have similar names. Also, their genealogy is a bit unclear. So this is a very strong case, but based on still scarce evidence. So I wouldn't think it's 100% sure, but at any rate, it would be very logical that Thaj was, well, controlled to some extent by the Caracinian kingdom, which had its hand on the trade in the Gulf. That would be that would really make sense. However, how Thaj was integrated into this kingdom remains unclear. Was it firmly integrated into it, or was it a loser allegiance? We don't know. I would tend to favor the latter solution because we have no evidence for Caracinian officials at Thaj for the moment. I'm just going to go quickly over the last phase, which is characterized by two interesting developments. First, the reinforcement of the city wall, and second, the shrinkage of the settlement. The reinforcement of the city wall and of the gates can be seen very well in our area 2. So the southeastern gate, where we see that sometime in the 3rd or 4th century AD, the gateway was blocked and the city wall was reinforced by 2 outer walls, while the eastern tower was leveled. And these works brought the total thickness of the city wall to something like 10 meters, which is huge. Actually, it's unparalleled in the Arabian Peninsula for a stone fortification. So we're dealing here with serious fortification works, which were designed probably, well, not to resist small attacks by local Bedouins, but to resist attacks by real armies equipped with war machines and perhaps sappers units. So the question is, why did they do that? What was the threat the local community was exposed to? What did they fear? And actually, if we look at the international context of this period, we find some clues. Indeed, the 3rd century AD is the period during which the Sasanian Empire begins to rise. And from the beginning, the Sasanians showed a certain interest in Eastern Arabia. We know that in 240, King Ardashir made a campaign in Eastern Arabia to assert his control over the shore of the Gulf. We also know that later, in 325, Shapur II made a retaliatory expedition in Arabia because some Arab tribes were raiding the coast of Persia. So we're dealing here with a climate of general unrest, insecurity, with the Sasanians trying to assert their control and rebellious Arab tribes on the other side. So this context of unrest is quite a good explanation for these massive fortification works. What is interesting is that, on the other hand, we see a shrinkage of the settled area. You see here the excavation areas which have provided traces from this period. Actually, the intramural area was only partially settled, and there was some remaining activity in the southeastern suburb with these 2 pottery workshops, which are dated from the late 3rd or 4th century AD. But what is clear is that the southeastern suburb was definitely abandoned in the early 4th century AD. Just a couple of words about the imports we find for that period. Well, there is still local pottery, of course, because we have pottery kilns here, but the imports are definitely all from the Sasanian realm. The most significant ones are these torpedo jars, which are well known throughout the region. So by the end of, so judging by our excavations, it seems that well, not by the end, by the middle of the 4th century AD, a large part of the site, if not most of it, was abandoned. Indeed, only one excavation area, our area 2, has yielded later traces of human activity. In this area, we did see some activity spanning the 5th to early 7th century AD. During this period, the city wall was partly dismantled, it partly collapsed, it was partly reclaimed, and over the ruins of the city wall, we see that drainage installations were built, a drain in stone and then a drain in clay, which were obviously meant to evacuate the water from a building located further north, a building which we haven't excavated, unfortunately. So there was something going on in this period. And there was something going on until quite late, because at the very end of this sequence, we found a squatter's occupation, very modest, dated to the early 7th century AD, so just before the coming of Islam. So this late occupation is very interesting. It seems to be very limited, but one has to remember that our excavations covered only a part of the site. We haven't excavated under the modern village, for instance, and it's very possible that other remains of this period lie under the modern village. So it's difficult to say exactly what the extent of this late occupation was. Anyway, the presence of this occupation echoes very nicely with the words of a pre-Islamic poet, al-Yashkuri, who says, بنيت بثاج مجدلا من حجارة لأجعله عزا على رغم من رغم. So, sorry for my bad Arabic. I have built in Thaj a castle of stone to make it a refuge in spite of those who would revile me. So, our archaeological discoveries at Thaj suggest that these verses are more than just boasting. There was actually something serious taking place at Thaj in the very late pre-Islamic period. So I plan to summarize all of this during my conclusion, but I think I'm running out of time. So I'm just going to, leave you with that slide which summarizes the major steps of development of Thaj. I'm perhaps just going to say a couple of words about the Islamic period, because I didn't mention it in my talk. There is actually evidence for Islamic occupation at Thaj, but it's very elusive. There are Islamic cemeteries. There are mentions of Qarya Thaj, so village of Thaj, in early Islamic Arabic literature. So there was probably something going on in the early Islamic period and perhaps later on at Thaj, probably because there were wells, and a place with water doesn't get abandoned so easily. But this Islamic occupation remains very elusive, and it's very, very likely that it actually lies under the old village of Thaj in the center of the walled city, where we should excavate to find it. Well, thank you very much for your attention, and sorry to have been a bit too long.
Dr. Rohmer, thank you very much for this presentation. With your permission, we'll open the floor for discussion.